Keith Prey is a well-established saxophonist, composer, organist, and educator in the 518 area. He was born and raised in Keysville, New York. Keith started playing the saxophone in the ninth grade and has been exploring all sorts of music ever since, with a solid foundation in jazz and rhythm and blues. In 1991, Keith started his college music studies at Schenectady Community College, while at the same time playing in the rock band Caged Monkey. By 1993, he went to SUNY Potsdam and finished his music ed degree. After Potsdam, Keith began playing with rhythm and blues and jazz groups in the 518 area, including gigs with Jill Hughes, Carl Landa, Steve Candlin, Tom Healy, and he also joined the Empire Jazz Orchestra in 1998. By the end of the 1990s, Keith moved to New York City and finished his master's in jazz performance while doing gigs with such people as Ray Vega, Jerry Weldon, Enrique Hanine, and others. In 2004, he began playing with the Paul Anka Orchestra, including appearances on national television. He played on and off with Paul Anka until 2006 when he moved back to the Capital Region. At this point, back in the 518 area and with a new addition to his family, his son Maceo, Keith started the Big Soul Ensemble residency at the Lark Tavern, which eventually moved to the Van Dyke until the pandemic in 2020. Keith also began teaching in the Schenectady City School District. Among the many things Keith did, he attended the European Graduate School to pursue doctoral graduate work in 2014 to 15. In 2016, Keith began playing Hammond organ as well as still playing saxophone gigs around town. Whether on saxophone or organ, Keith has recorded several CDs that include his 2020 release, Universal Blues, and more recently his 2021 release, three-bass hit, Down the Middle. Keith is ever busy as a husband and father, saxophonist, organist, composer, martial arts practitioner, community jazz program promoter, and a valuable artist to grace the 518 area. Please listen and enjoy these two different sides of this unique musician, and then check out the interview with him on Empire Radio Sounds. Okay. Keith Prey, I want to thank you for sharing your time and music with Empire Radio Sounds. Could you give us a little background on how you got started playing music?
All right. Well, first, thanks for having me. And let's see. Playing music. I started. I was really interested in music as long as I can remember, and I used to have a
Mhm.
little tape recorder, and I would put it up next to the Zenith television and
Yeah.
record the movie soundtracks and the TV show themes. And I was really little, and I would just listen to them. And even though I didn't know there was a thing called recording techniques and all that stuff, every week I would re-record the same one and try to get a better sound, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was interested right away, and then um, I remember being in kindergarten and seeing that kids were taking piano lessons, and I was like, after school, and I was like, oh, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And they said you have to be in second grade, so I waited every day until second grade, and so I took a little bit of piano lessons. I didn't, I mean, I guess I must have had an ear for it to some degree because I could play the melodies, but I had no idea that I didn't know how to read music until I
Right.
got trying to get into bands.
Yeah.
But I tried to teach myself the guitar in like sixth grade, saved up my money mowing lawns and bought myself a guitar, and
Cool.
that went horribly wrong. And but from fourth grade through eighth grade, I tried to get in band every year, and they wouldn't let me because you had to take an aptitude test. And apparently, I wasn't. I didn't have enough aptitude,
Aptitude or attitude?
so I didn't get into that. And then I had an older cousin who was playing trumpet,
Yeah.
and I said, I just want to play in band. I don't know why they won't let me in. And so he said, "Why don't you talk to the high school band director?" And I was in eighth grade at the end of the eighth grade, and
Yeah.
so I went down and I said, "I'd like to play in band." And he said, "Okay, what do you want to play?" And I was like, "Really? It was that easy?" Um,
Yeah.
so I went through every instrument I could think of, and then finally I just said saxophone. I didn't even hardly know what a saxophone was, and that was it. I played one note, went home, told my mother I was going to be a music major.
Really? But it sounds like you knew very early on this is where you were headed into
Yeah,
music.
I knew it, but I didn't know it. It was like
Yeah.
I just was always fascinated by the music and trying to
Yeah.
check it out.
I can completely relate to that. I mean, in a different way. I mean, I started out listening to my parents' little 45s and Elvis and tequila and whatever, and saxophone grabbed my ear. By age 5, like I just knew this is where I was headed. But you're the only person I've met who knew so young, even though you didn't know. You
Yeah, I had
know,
no idea. Yeah,
most adults I meet, they did not know what they were, still wonder what they're going to do.
yeah.
So
And the funny thing is that like it's not that my parents didn't like music, but we didn't listen to music other than Christmas time.
that's interesting. Yeah,
You
so it
know,
just happened.
and I grew up in the mountains, so there wasn't a lot of
Okay.
radio. There were just a couple stations,
Hmm.
and I just remember, just being fascinated by it, and I did find, a bucket of 45s when I was a kid in a closet.
Yeah.
And my grandmother used to work at a bowling alley, and
Okay.
part of her job was to change out the jukebox.
Isn't
And
that
so
funny?
so I would spin these records and check out all these things, Chubby
Sure.
Checker and Beatles and
Cool.
and so I was always spinning records and checking them out.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and then of course I'm also an MTV baby, so I remember when
Yeah.
MTV hit the airs. So
Okay.
I got the visual too, so I'm sure it
Yeah.
was all in there, but nobody wasn't until my older cousin got into music that I started to share that with somebody,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
Well, cool. And interesting the synchronicity of your grandmother and the records and so forth and how things go in life.
Hmm.
Um, as I was checking out your recent work on your website, it's really quite a broad spectrum of music from funky organ trio work to big band music with all sorts of influences, not to mention the large amount of work you do within the educational aspect of our community. Is there a sort of mission statement, if you will, that Keith Prey lives by? And could you perhaps explain that to us?
In the words of Clark Terry, keep on keeping on.
I just did. an interview before this one with Clark Terry's bass player, Marcus McLaurin, who
Nice.
I was in the Air Force with, and he played with Clark for 30 years. So, so much about synchronicity.
I did a few gigs with him.
Oh,
Did that
really?
too.
You know
Yeah.
Marcus. So this is funny because you're
Yeah.
both going to be on this month. I wish I'd known that before I
I
talked
don't
to
think he,
Marcus.
I don't think he even knows who I am, but it was just we ended up on a couple gigs together, and that was it. But
Oh, that's
yeah, that's
funny.
funny. Yep.
Yeah, we both got in the Air Force about 15 days apart from each other way back
Wow.
in the last century.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
okay, well the mission statement is keep on, and I like that, and I get it. I completely get it. No matter how old you are, this it's just a wonderful thing.
But it's broader than that, but it keeps, it's evolved, as like it started as a real selfish thing. I want to play music.
Sure, sure.
I want to practice music. I want to make music. I want to do this. And then it became like, well, everybody should do this or be involved. And then,
Yeah,
I went to school for education, not knowing that there was anything like performing as an option. And then
yeah,
by the time I got halfway through college, I wanted to perform.
yeah,
So when I got out of school, I didn't teach, much to my mother's chagrin.
yeah.
But and so, when I got into the educational side, it was like, hey, can you do this workshop? Can you do this clinic? Can you do this?
Yeah, yeah,
And I realized I was enjoying the connection with helping people, and
yeah.
and then, so it's like, and then it goes full circle till you realize that, in a group, it's not me, it's us, and we're
Yeah.
helping each other and we're communicating. And so,
Hmm.
I became much more interested in I guess, the philosophical side of things over the years.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah, and that's I think that's perfectly normal and should be that way. I think, but well, before I get into some of your music, perhaps you can expound a bit on playing music in the 518 area. What sort of opportunities in music do you think are available, and what sort of things do you wish there were more of for aspiring musicians in our area?
that's a big one, because things have changed so much. Well, when I first came to the area in the early 90s,
Hmm.
uh, there was a lot of music going on. I was more into the rock scene. I was playing in a
Hmm.
rock band, but I was a jazz fan, so I would go see Brignola and all those guys, and
Yeah, yeah.
and do some jam sessions. And then when I moved to New York City, um, after a while, some music up here there became more jazz. And then when I moved back in 2006,
Uh-huh.
it seemed like there was a lot of jazz going on. And
Yeah.
then I was working a ton, when I was working in the 90s, I was working a lot of blues, R&B with a little jazz.
Yeah.
And then when I moved back in 2006, I was working 5 nights a week playing jazz, and in different
Hmm.
places, and it was really healthy, and there was a lot of musicians playing, and it wasn't just it wasn't the small little pocket of musicians like it was before.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the economy tanked,
Yeah.
and it took a little while for it to hit the music scene, really, but it really hit. And then everything became like duos
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
background music. And then an interesting thing hit, and the singer-songwriter thing really took off around here, and acoustic duos, and it was like
Hmm.
acoustic rock and all this stuff. And then that replaced the background music for the jazz musicians, really, kind
Hmm.
of. And
Yeah.
so, but there was always, jazz has always survived. But like currently, especially since COVID, I mean, I'm trying to think of an exclusive jazz venue, and the only one I can think of is Nine Maple.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's always been a mainstay, current. Yeah.
yeah,
It's, I was talking to Joe Finn, and he had mentioned the breweries and wineries are kind of a new market that, not just jazz, but for music in general. And so I think that's the good news.
yeah.
Jazz is always a tough sell.
You have to create opportunities.
Yeah.
I was never good on the business side. I was lucky. Whatever reason, I would get a gig, and then I'd be able to keep it because I guess I wasn't being a jerk or something, or. And
Yeah.
and then I would just kind of get in the rotation, and I would go, and I get in a rotation somewhere else, and it stayed steady. And then of course COVID hit, and all that's
Yeah.
gone. And I don't know how to book. I mean, I guess I kind of know how to book gigs, but in the current market, I don't really know. And so, so
That's
it's been slow rolling. But I see
yeah.
other people are making a lot of waves and booking gigs, and the young musicians are out working a little bit. And so, I think the possibility is always there. Um, Especially for somebody who's got the energy, with my teaching and all that stuff, I just don't have a lot of time, so I don't go booking the
Yeah.
gigs. But and then now I, with the organ thing, I'm looking to get out of just the jazz clubs and do like a more of a funk thing or whatever.
Sure.
So just to create some more opportunities for myself. But I was always worried that I didn't want to steal somebody's gig. I didn't want to, so I would try to, when I did get, I would create my, like the big band. We're going to go play at the Lark Tavern. We're going
Yeah,
to be,
yeah.
nobody was playing there on a Tuesday night. That's where we'll go. Or we're going to go play at this place. Nobody else is
Hmm.
playing there, so.
Sure.
But the young musicians, I know that there seems I know Joe Barn is doing a couple jam session things now. Like that was
Yeah.
the thing that's been missing for a long time.
Yeah.
It was just there used to be so many jam sessions, whether they're blues, R&B, jazz, whatever. And there are still a few in that pocket of thing, but the jazz thing, there's really not much.
No, not at the moment that I can think of. I think that's a good assessment, especially the part about how the singer-songwriter thing played its role, you know?
Sure.
And well, quite frankly, the economics, right? Two and three people is cheaper than four or five, and blah blah. As a sax player, I've heard you cover it all from blues to outside jazz. Is there a specific approach to playing the saxophone that is your way of playing that you might explain? And secondly, who are some of the sax players that inspire you?
That's a big one too. A big question here. So I probably should start with my influences because then that'll
Okay, yeah, I
explain.
probably should have put the
No,
question
it's
in
okay. Yeah,
reverse.
in my case, because I used to, I used to look, you're always assessing yourself and where you're coming from, where you're heading and
Oh
stuff. And then
yeah,
I would see, my peers, really improving really fast and doing certain things. And then I always felt like I was behind, partly because I got a late start and I always felt like I was just behind.
sure.
But then I realized, I have, whether it's a short attention span or whether again, I've always been so enamored with music in general. It was never like, oh, jazz or oh, this, that I often would, I'd go down this path and I would check out all the, whatever, maybe it's King Curtis, right? And checking
Sure.
out King Curtis and Maceo Parker and all that stuff. But then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, it's like, but there's Ornette Coleman. And then I go
Yeah.
check out Ornette Coleman. It's like, oh, wait, but there's Cannonball Adderley. And then, oh,
Yeah.
there's Boots Randolph, it's like, and
Sure.
so I was always like this, whereas some people were just going like this. And,
Yeah.
for a long time, it definitely gave me the ability to be hired by more people because I
Yeah.
could play a bluegrass gig or I could play
Yep.
an avant-garde gig or I could do whatever. Uh, but as far as like my learning, it slowed me down in that trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and people used to accuse me of just being a copycat and all that stuff. But I always knew that if all those different influences were gonna really make me different,
Yeah.
because I wasn't just a Charlie Parker fan. I wasn't, it's like how many people love John Zorn and Maceo Parker and, John Coltrane and these really eclectic mix. And so eventually all that kind of went around in circles and then just kind of popped out the bottom, so influences wise, early on it was, Charlie. The first person saxophone player I know that I heard was Paul Desmond in ninth grade.
Hmm.
Um, my band director said you need to hear this, and I was into so much different kinds of music. This is great. Then he told me to check out Charlie Parker, and I lived in the middle of nowhere, and there was no Charlie Parker recordings. So it took me about 6 months, and I finally found, I found a compilation that had the famous alto break on it,
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that was it. I was like all bird all the time for a long time. Um, and then I got into like Coltrane and stuff. And then I was 18. I just on a whim went and saw Maceo Parker. Had no idea who he was.
Really?
Completely shook my world, and and now I named my son Maceo, so that tells you how that one worked out.
Yeah.
And and I did, and alto. I usually say that my three main influences on the alto, besides Bird, because Bird is just a guarantee, right? So then you got, for
Sure.
me, it was Cannonball Adderley, Johnny Hodges, and Jackie McLean.
Okay. Yeah.
And as far as the jazz side, and then of course there's Maceo, and
Yeah.
then but I was always into the tenor players too. So especially like the Texas tenors and all that stuff. So
Yep.
I was
Yep.
always into everything from Houston Pearson and all
Sure.
the way to Coltrane and
Uh-huh.
Lockjaw Davis and Ben Webster, and so there was never this one thing. It was always their sound that got me. It was like,
Okay.
and the differences and the possibilities in the sound. So as all those influences kind of hit me over the years and continue to hit me, it's like my approach was always sound first. And I even remember in high school reading that, I think, what was it? Rico or something had a little not a magazine, but a little pamphlet they would send
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And there was a David Sanborn article.
Uh-huh.
And he was like, technique is great, but sound is always the most important thing.
Yeah.
And for whatever
Yeah.
reason, I always remembered that. And so I worked so much on just creating my sound, and that keeps evolving, and I keep reassessing,
Sure.
and so
Sure.
so sound was the big thing. Could I sing my melodies? I always played, even though I had learned the theory and all that stuff, I always played by ear first.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And but I was also highly influenced by like Stravinsky and stuff. So chromaticism was always a big
hmm
part. But then Eddie Clean Aid Vincent played the blues, and I'd be like,
Well, I concur with all that. I mean, well, I just love the sound of all saxophones in general, it seemed. So like, I completely get it. I mean, and I think it's a good, you're right. Some people will take a straight trajectory of a specific way they want to play and where they're headed. There's certainly something to be said for that, but it also cuts you out of work opportunities for one thing. And now that I'm older than younger, I appreciate seeing the broad spectrum of from Boots Randolph all the way to John Coltrane. And as a player, it's more fun for one night to do a rockabilly gig and the next night a cocktail hour like Stan Getz. Um,
sure, yeah.
I think it makes it a lot more fun. And saxophone, when you talk about sound, it's so unique from one player to another to another. I mean, I've heard somewhere that even if you had Michael Brecker's setup, you wouldn't sound like him because your throat is different. So,
I remember one night at Nine Maple, Lee Russo and I were on a gig together,
uh-huh,
and I had this Mark 6 tenor that was this massive sound, and I had this
uh-huh.
huge mouthpiece and a light reed. It was the anti-Lee and
Oh yeah,
everything that
yeah,
he did.
yeah.
And I was just like, man, could you just play this? I just want to hear what it sounds like out in front. And so
Uh-huh.
he played my setup, and it sounded just like Lee.
Really?
And I was like, and then
That
then I
that's
played his
fascinating.
setup, and it sounded just like me,
Yeah.
and so, but I remember too, like, I had been living in New York City, and when I moved back here, I was playing with the Empire Jazz Orchestra, and so at the set break, uh, Sal Maida was in the audience, the piano,
Yeah,
like, for
yeah.
those who don't
Remember
know, he was
Sal.
he was one of the local legend piano players, and
Yep,
and
yep.
I hadn't seen him in years, and he was older at the time, and he was having vision problems, couldn't really see, and he
Uh-huh.
came down, and he goes, man, I heard that they're like, oh, the song was going, and this alto player starts to play, and he goes, and about two measures in, I was like, that's Keith, and I was like, I finally did it. I was like,
Well,
finally, somebody recognizes it as, somebody's like, oh, that sounds like Cannonball, or oh, that sounds like Johnny Hodges. They were like, no, that was Keith. And I was like,
no, you got your sound. There ain't no doubt about it. I mean, you definitely have your own sound, in my opinion. I never thought of you as sounding like a copycat to anybody, you know. Well, let me get to my next question, the other part of your career, as it were. As a keyboard player, doubler myself at times, I admire your ability to, with the organ part of your musical arsenal, because the independence from the left hand bass, and the right hand chords and solo work at the same time, and that hurdle is really quite a challenge. It's something I never conquered really. Maybe two songs. What are some of the musical adventures you're working on in the organ side of your musical task of late? I know you just released a CD with my friend Mike Wooten.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always loved the Hammond organ. Going back to that time I saw Maceo Parker, so I was 18. It was the first time I ever saw a Hammond organ, and Larry Goldings was playing, and
Oh wow.
he was playing left hand, and I didn't know that there was no bass player at first. I was trying to figure out what was going
Yeah,
on. But even before that, I do know that there was a piano player in my high school band who was so talented. In fact, he lives in Europe now, and that's what he does is play. But he was older than me by a few years, and he used to walk left-hand bass lines on the
sure.
piano. And I was fascinated by bass lines, and so I just he showed me a really rudimentary, play 1-3-5 or whatever, and
Uh-huh.
so I kind of could do that on a couple things, and I think maybe I am left-handed, so I'm wondering if that's
Okay.
part of the reason why I've been able to
Hmm.
deal with bass lines better than some who've tried to do it, but over the years I kept that up a little bit, and I could play a rudimentary chord and play a bass line, get through a
Yeah.
blues or something, and um, so I always kind of kept that up a little bit. But then when I got a Hammond organ, well, actually I got a organ clone when I was still living in the city.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't trying to play it so much as get the sounds.
Yeah.
So I would go see Dr. Lonnie play,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then I would come home and try to find those sounds. And so in what I would do is learn the basic tunes, but I would learn kind of what his bass line was, what the melody was, what the chords were, but with the idea that I was going to hopefully have like you play it and I'd play saxophone,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? So I couldn't really put it together. And then even when I moved up here and I did get a Hammond, I played a little more just because I was so excited to have a Hammond organ. But it was still, I just kept trying to get people to come over and play the organ, and then I think it was just, it's about 5.5 years now since I got serious about it. And I just woke up one morning and said, I'm going to play the Hammond organ every day and I'm going to
Yeah.
gig and I'm going to do this. And so I got really structured about it and got my left hand, and I literally would practice just my left hand, just my right hand. Then I would
Uh-huh.
play for real left hand and random stuff in my right hand just to try to focus it, and then flip and play real here and focus here
Okay.
because what I couldn't. It actually wasn't my left hand was the problem. It was my right hand. I couldn't play melodies with a left hand. I could play
Yeah.
chords with my left hand, but I couldn't play a melody or solo. And
Right,
so
right.
so I could accompany somebody a little bit rudimentary and keep a groove, but as soon as I tried to get my right hand involved, it was a mess.
Yeah.
And so I worked really hard on that, and it's still a challenge for sure. Um, and over the time, I started studying with Tony Monaco, who's one of the
Oh,
great.
nice.
Yes, and so I was just hoping to be able to play some blues, play some funk, and next thing you know, we're playing some jazz standards and all
Uh-huh.
stuff. And I was like, "Ooh, might be too much for me. I don't know." And so, but then all of a sudden, I started kind of being able to play some jazz stuff too. I didn't have great solo chops, but it could sound authentic. And then, so my projects wise, I started as I was just gonna have like a funky group, and then
Uh-huh.
next thing I know, I'm playing jazz tunes. And then so came time to start to record, and I wanted to do like a jazz record, nothing complicated, but and I realized my left hand wasn't as good as the other side. So and I was like, if I'm going to be playing jazz tunes, it's got to sound really good.
Yeah.
So then went back to I said, well, I got into this to play funk and R&B and blues. So that's why I put out the record that I did first. I went back and I was like, you know what? I got all these tunes. I can do these tunes. Keep working on my jazz chops. Make the next one more of a jazz shuffle
Sure.
and blues and whatever. So that's the organ side. That's where it's been heading. And I still actually, uh, I just started working with a couple rappers. I wanted to get like
Oh,
some rap
interesting.
involved and uh, and I started putting a synthesizer on top too, just to have
Sure.
sounds. And it's become a mess, a big mess of obsession. But it's fun. It keeps me learning. And
Yeah,
not that
yeah.
the saxophone wouldn't, but again, my attention span just kind of shifted to go like, oh, and
Well,
it totally. When people would people would ask me to play organ and saxophone, and then
yeah.
once I split my hands, I couldn't put them back. I couldn't play the saxophone. Like on the same gig, I would have to
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
It's like I could, let alone the same song. There was no way I could do that. It was like so.
Yeah.
If I was just playing like there was a bass player, I could pull it off.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
even then, my brain was still disjointed. And then now I don't fall apart on the saxophone when I put them back together, but it's still like it's something I'm in my radar to try to do more of it.
It's
Like
a tough
Mike,
double.
I don't know if you know Mike Newman, the tenor player.
I have met him at least once or
Yeah,
twice
Mike's a
in
great tenor
passing.
player, but he also plays really nice bass. So
Okay, now
when I
it's
first
coming
put the
back to
group
me.
together, I actually wanted him to play bass and saxophone, and I'd play organ and saxophone, and we would flip roles.
Sure, sure.
And then, of course, I couldn't put my hands together. So that's still on my radar to get that to where, you know.
I get it. I mean, within my work and night train, if they don't get a keyboard player, I end up doing this double duty thing,
Hmm.
and it is. I guess you got to think a little bit ahead before the next song happens, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And again,
so
I play mostly by ear, so
yeah,
it was I'm pretty good at hear. Like I can play alto to tenor and play pretty well by ear on gigs, and flip them back and forth. But then the concert pitch thing, it's like if I'm just playing concert pitch, my ear will get through it pretty good. But
yeah,
once I start
yeah.
mixing and matching, then it's
Well, and that's where the problem happens for me. So if one night I'm playing, keyboards, the next night I'm playing sax, and I forget to transpose, and yeah, that can be a problem. Um, okay, I'm going to edit this part out that I'm talking right now. It says your meeting will end in 10 minutes. So let's just talk, and when it shuts off, don't worry about it. I will send you an email. We'll set up another Zoom session real fast, like
unless
this week.
you could just this way, or we could just do it now. You could do it now if you want.
All right. All right, we'll do that. When it runs out, we'll let it run out, and then I'll send you another link right away. We'll just continue from there. Okay.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right. So I'm going to get this little sign I got out of my way and just continue with my next question. Cool. All that will be edited out. From small groups to big band, you have dealt with a lot of musicians. What do you look for when leading a group and the musicians you hire? Leading a group is a skill set unto itself. Do you have a particular philosophy in regard to leading a band, and how does the type of group you're leading play into that? It's kind of a long question, but
Yeah.
all about leadership, I guess.
Yeah, which is funny because I never actually wanted to be a leader. I just ended up being a leader a lot. But the you know, it's
Well, we'll start with,
shifted.
what do you look for in a musician?
That's changed over the years to some extent. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I want people who I could communicate with both both verbally and through the music,
Yeah, yeah,
that's like a huge priority. If I don't feel like there's a connection there, then if there's a disconnect somewhere, then
yeah,
that's frustrating. Yeah, obviously you want like the best musicians you can get. And what does that mean? It might mean something different for each situation. Because again, I
sure.
play so many different situations. Like,
Yep,
well, this person's a great whatever, and they play really great R&B, but they don't. The swing is more my style than this person, or
sure.
so. But over the years, that's become less and less of a thing for me. It's more, it's like how easy can the gig be as far as just dealing, like can we just have a good time and make music
Yeah,
together and at the end of the night, say goodnight and everything's cool and it feels
Yep.
good and we had a good time, so and I used to maybe it's because just having lived in New York City, like for example, like drummers play a certain way in New York where they don't play like that most other places in the universe, and so
Mhm.
it's a lot more edge and it's a lot more intense, and
Mhm.
I might play with somebody from where upstate and they play more laid back and at first that was kind of frustrating to me and it was like
Sure.
it's like I want to dig in. I want to it's not it doesn't feel the way that I'm used to it feeling. But then I learned that it's like, well, I have to learn to communicate with them too. So it's like can we find this common ground?
Yeah.
you know, if somebody just won't bend at all, then that can be frustrating, which can be the same thing if I'm not going to bend, right? So it's
Sure.
like, and I may think the time should be here and you should think the time is there. And if we can't finally just decide the time is here and then just deal with it and have a good time, then we're both going to end up frustrated at the end of the night. Uh, so that was one of the big lessons I had to learn a long time ago was just to,
Sure.
it's like, all right, I may try to pull you along with me because it's my group for a while, but then I realized, oh, maybe you just don't understand where I'm coming from, so I'm gonna come to you and see if we can make music that way.
Well, you're hitting on a very real situation that happens, especially when you're playing jazz. And my brother, who's not a musician, but is a fan, and when I would talk to him about like that kind of problem, it just wasn't happening. And he would say, "If I were you, I would just go sit down, just go sit down and let it fall out."
There have been
uh,
those times when I wanted to do that. Yeah.
what? Pull a Miles Davis. No. So, all right. Well, let me get on to my next question here. I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk a bit about three different things you are doing. Perhaps you could tell us. Well, we already covered some of this with the organ trio and your current saxophone work. But what we haven't talked about is your commitment to education. I see you do a lot of different things within our community, whether it be through your day gig or whatever, in support of jazz for young people. Could you talk a little bit about that? Maybe your
Sure.
intentions with it. And,
Like I said earlier, it's at some point I realized that, I could get kids excited or I could share some knowledge and you could see the light go on and that's although yeah, that feeds me because I get to see the light go on and I'm like, oh, that makes me feel good. At the same
sure.
time, I learned over the years, all the life skills if you allow yourself as a jazz musician to realize that there's all these life skills built in,
Yeah, yeah,
then you could really use that in your own life or somebody else's, help them out. So, um, whether it was when I taught elementary school band or I've taught some college stuff and I've taught, you know, preschool age up to 75, 80 years old
yeah, yeah,
and it's there's just so much that the gift of music can give to somebody. So my day gig is at Schenectady High School, which is a city school, and I there's a set of challenges or skills that I need to share with them more important than if it's a whole note or a half note, and
yeah, yeah.
so that's what I do there, and then I teach now. I teach at SUNY Albany. I run their jazz band, and it's a different level of skills that I can give to them. And I'm also involved with the SEO program, the Empire State Youth Orchestra Jazz.
Uh-huh.
So there you get kids who are more driven, and
Sure,
and
sure,
so it it my teaching has always been very improvisatory, which is
sure.
interesting. That's probably why I like jazz. It's just my personality. I like to
Yeah, yeah.
problem solve, find a solution, and today's solution might be this, and the exact same problem, and whatever tomorrow it might be this is the solution.
Yeah,
So
you'll certainly learn that in urban teaching. That's a
so
fact.
yeah, so all these different educational opportunities, and I calculated it. This is a bunch of years ago. I think it's over 40 schools that I've worked in
Uh-huh.
my career. Not just clinics, but actually had programs, So and
Yeah.
from Jamaica, Queens to Manhasset, Long Island to up
Uh-huh.
here to whatever. So, it's there's so many similar problems, yet there's all these uniquenesses to every program, and
Hmm.
so part of it is I just have a blast doing it. So I keep doing it. There's stressful days, but I just look at it like there's worse things I could be doing for employment for sure. And the fact that I have two things that I can do that I enjoy, is a pretty lucky thing. And they happen to be related. And
Well, I think it's wonderful that you're keeping jazz alive. It's things like that that keep the music alive, from one generation to the next to the next. My God, when I started as a young kid, it was called dance band.
oh, I
And
know,
from
yeah,
dance band, it went to jazz band or big band,
stage band and
yeah, stage band. I forgot about that one. Yeah, it was
uh-huh.
stage band.
Yeah, that was a high quality one.
I forgot about it. And what it basically meant was five saxophones, the typical big band setup, but it's changed a lot. I'm down to 1 minute here, Keith. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna end this meeting, send you another link, and we'll continue. Okay. So let me get out of this one. I'm gonna end the recording.